So welcome back to our final project. We have 4 more exercises to go through. So the first one is going to be exercise 5 right here. This one actually doesn't have much to do with 6, 7, and 8. 6, 7, and 8 are all connected, but 5 is going to be kind of on its own. The reason that I've added 5 in here is because I want you guys to get some practice with creating classes so that you can solve specific problems. So in this case, for example, we want to create a class called expense filter, and this should have only one method in it. And I just want you to get some more practice with creating classes for very specific purposes. So what we are going to do is below here, we will create the class called expense filter. Really cool. And then we need to create a method. So what is this method going to be called? Filter out small expenses. All right, very cool. As you can imagine, this is another one where the parameter is actually going to be a list of expenses. And then actually the return type is also going to be a list of expenses. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So let's go back up and read this. It says, the method should take a list of expenses as a parameter and should return a list of expenses, but filter out anything that's less than 100. Make sure to print out the result of calling this method in the main method. So just like we've been doing with all of the other functions and all of the other stuff that we've built, we want to print out the result of calling this method. So we now have the expense filter class, but we need to actually finish out this method. All right, so filtering a list. We actually went through that in one of our videos, the video on lists. So if you don't exactly remember what that's all about, I highly recommend going back to that video and refreshing your memory. So we have expenses right here. And whenever you hear filter out, you need to use something called the filter. All right, really cool. But what do we actually want to filter out? Well, we know that each one of these is an expense, okay? So if we take a look at the data type for this, which for me is just F1, we can see that it's an expense. But it said there that we want to filter out anything that's below 100. So that would mean that if the expense is over 100, then we would actually want to keep it. So what we actually need to do in order for this to work is to take a look at the amount, right? So if we don't have the amount here, this is going to fail because obviously you're comparing expense to 100, and what the heck does that even mean? You need to compare the amount of the expense and then see, okay, is this over 100? If it is over 100, then we filter it, meaning that it's coming with the result. If we were to do less than this, then we would only get the expenses back that are actually less than 100, which is not what we want. So if you're confused about that, make sure you go back to the video and refresh your mind on how filter actually works. So this would be expensive expenses, I guess. All right, really cool. So once we have that, we just need to return it. And very cool. That's actually the end of that. So now all that we need to do is to go ahead and call it. So remember that in order to use this class, we need to instantiate it. So let's instantiate the expense filter. Now let's go here. So this is the instantiation of this class. So now we have a filter that we can actually use. Let's call it. So expense filter. Filter out small expenses. Very cool. And then let's give it the same list that we've been giving it. And then this gives you a return, right? So this would be, let's just call this big expenses. We can call it whatever we want, obviously. And then at the end, let's actually print this out, okay? And let's see if this is actually true. All right, so expense amount is 14,000. Let's see the rest of them. So 500, and then this one's 1,312. All right, so just to prove to you that this actually works, let's increase the price of the pants to 105. And now we should also see the pants included in here. Let's go back to number 5, rerun it. And there are the handy dandy pants here at the end. All right, really cool. Those are some very expensive pants. So let's revert that because I actually think that's totally stupid. All right, so moving on now to exercise 6, 7, and 8. So I'm really excited about actually exercises 6, 7, and 8 because we're going to build something that's actually useful, something that you might actually have to do at a company. So I have been asked numerous times over the last few years to take some data, either from a database or some static data, and then to create, for example, a CSV file out of it or just a regular file out of it. It's something that you will also come across as a programmer sometime in your career. But to do that, we need to actually build the smaller methods first and then kind of chain them together to create this bigger program. So what I mean by that is for step 6, one of the things we need is an expense sorter, so to sort expenses. And then for step 7, we need a way to transform each expense to a row, to a CSV row. So if you're not quite sure what a CSV file actually is, so this is actually what a CSV file would look like. So it has the column name, so name, amount, and month. And then this would be a row. So this is a row, this is a row, this is a row. And this is actually something that you could import into Excel and work off of if you wanted to. So this is actually really useful. And I will teach you how to create something that actually makes this. So for now, we're going to delete this and get rid of it. That was just a preview of what's to come. I'm going to give us a little bit more space right here. And let's get to it. So before I continue, actually, so 6 and 7 are needed for 8 to work. And then 8 is actually going to be the printing out part. And we will do that together. I don't expect you guys to know how to do that without some help. All right, so let's take a look at 6. So it says create a class called expense sorter with a method called sort by month. This method should take in a list of expenses as a parameter and return a list of expenses ordered by month of purchase, where January would be at the top and December at the bottom. Call this method and print out the result of calling it in the main method. All right, really cool. So let's create first our class. So let's just cheat here and grab this class and then sorter. And then this is not the right name for the method. So let's go back and check out the right name for this method. Oh yeah, sort by month. Okay, so let's do this. And then actually the parameter is already correct and the return type is already correct. It's just that this right here is actually incorrect. So instead of filtering a list, we actually need to do something called sorting, which we've gone over before in other classes. So in order for sorting to work, all you really need to do is to provide it the criteria, and it will take care of actually ordering it for you. So if we provide the month, it's actually going to sort this January all the way to December for us. So it's a little bit magical, and we're not going to go into it, but all you have to do is provide it this month right here, and it's kind of going to auto-magically order everything for you. It's really neat. But this variable name doesn't work anymore. So sorted expenses by month. All right. And very cool. So what it does is it takes in this list right here. It sorts it. And then the criteria that it uses to sort it is this month. And then it knows, okay, January is the first month and December is the last month. So I'm going to give it to you in that order. So really cool. So again, once again, what we need to do is to instantiate this class before we use it. So expense sorter. And then let's call the class to instantiate it. And now we can actually use it. So now we have this expense sorter. Cool. And then sort by month. Expenses. Great. So this returns something, meaning that we need to save this to a variable. So expenses sorted by month. All right, really cool. And then now let's print this out and see what it actually looks like. All right, cool. Let's rerun this. And then this is the actual line that we want. So as you can see, this is January here. And then this is also January. This is January. This is January. This is February, March, April, June. So at the very end, we should see November because there is no December. So really cool. We actually accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. So moving on now to exercise 7. So this is going to be an exercise in printing, actually. So what it says is create a method in the expense data class called CSV or toCSV_row. This method should take nothing as a parameter, but should return a string. The string should be formatted like this. All right, so this is pretty decently straightforward. Let's go back to our expense class, which is up here. We want to create a method in this class called toCSV_row. So what this will do is whenever we call this on an expense, it's going to print it out in a way that we can then use to create our CSV printer. All right, so what it said is just to have it return a string. So that's what we're doing. And now we need to give it the format that we actually wanted. And the format, I think, was already there for us. So all we need to do is copy and paste it. Yeah, exactly. This puppy right here. Let's grab it. Go back up to, oh, sorry guys, here. And then boom, that's actually all that you need to do. So it will take the expense, and then whenever one of the expenses calls this method right here, it will print it out in this format. So that's really, really neat. But let's actually make sure that this works. So let's go back down to 7. Let's grab one of the expenses at random. And then let's do toCSV_row. Remember that if I call this right now, yes, it's returning that string, but we actually haven't printed out that string, right? So it's not going to appear here. So the first step would be, let's actually save this. So let's just call it CSV_row, and then let's print it out. And what we expect to see is, I think it's the car one. So we expect to see the car and all of the cars fields in here. So yeah, look at that, car, comma, 14,000, comma, November. Really good job, guys. So now we're going to move on to exercise 8. So I did not and do not expect you to be able to do this on your own, but that's what I'm here for. And this is why we are all learning programming together so that we can grow and learn and become better. So it says right here, create a class called expense printer. This class should have a method called print to CSV file. Print to CSV file should take in a list of expenses as a parameter. When you call the method, it should create a file called expense report.csv. The expenses should be ordered by month of purchase, aka January would be at the top, December at the bottom. So we've done this before. You will need a combination of steps 6 and 7 in order to get this to work properly. Remember that in programming, there are often multiple ways to get to the same solution. So I hope that you guys tried this out before listening to me talk, but if not, no worries. All right, so let's create our expense printer. So actually, let's just copy and paste this right here. And then let's just change this name to printer. And then it said up here that I saw something that looked weird. Oh, no, never mind. That it wanted the method to be called this. And this is actually not going to return anything. It's actually going to print to a real file, which you will then see right here. So I'm going to delete this just so that you believe me. And when we run it, we should see a file by that name being printed out. So what we need to do is we need to pull in actually a class that Java makes available for us. So the Java library, the entire Java standard library is actually available to us as Kotlin programmers. And one of the things in there is called the file class. So in the file class, what we can do is we can create an instance of this class where we give it, let's just call it expenses report, I think, .csv. We give it the name of the file plus the extension. So this could actually be anything you want. You could actually call it blah or ball or whatever. So we create the instance of this file class and then we save it right here. once we have this, you can actually call this method right here, and this will return something really cool. So this will actually return a print writer. So with this print writer, you will then be able to write to a file. So the first step is create the file. The second is, once you have the file, create the writer for that file. And then the third is actually writing stuff. So what we could do to start off with is we take our print writer. Whoa. And let's just simply try doing a println to it. And then let's do name, what was it, amount, and then month. So what we expect to see actually is, one second guys, I will explain what this is for in a minute. What we expect to actually see now is just a file with this name and then with these column headers. So let's run this program. Actually, before we do that, I was getting ahead of myself. We need to first instantiate this class. So this is called the expense printer. Very cool. Expense printer. Instantiated. Very nice. And now expense printer. Print a CSV file. And then it needs a list of expenses, which we are obviously not using in our method right now, but that's besides the point. We rerun this. And now here is our expense report. Look at that. Name, amount, and month. Really good job, guys. So now that we have that, right, we need to figure out a way to loop through the expenses and then print them out in a CSV-friendly manner, meaning you would have the first piece of data here, and then a comma, then the second, then a comma, then the third. But we've actually done this before. We just did this in exercise number 7, right? So now we can kind of combine steps. So this creates the column headers. So let's just write this here, column headers. Really cool. Now the next thing we need to do is to loop through, right? So when we loop through, we're not actually transforming anything. All we're doing is we want to use each one of these expenses one by one. So whenever you want to just use something and you don't want to transform it, you don't want to filter it, then you can use a for each. We've gone through this in the list video. So if you're curious about that, please go back to that video. So now we take the expense, this expense right here, okay? And then we write to CSV row, right? And as we know, this goes right here to our to CSV row method, which is within this data class right here. So let's take a look at this one more time. What this does is create the file, create the writer for this file, print out the column headers, and then print out each row, right? Expenses.for each of these expenses, print it out in the nice row format. And then at the very end, we call print writer.flush. So what this actually means is whenever you are calling this print line right here, it's kind of like storing it up in memory. And then when you're done, when you want to finish and actually write it to the file, you need to call flush, because then it takes it from being in memory to actually writing it to the file. All right. So this is actually not going to work quite yet, because this is just for eaching and then calling it.toCSV row. But what we actually need to do is grab this print writer and then println, and then put the result of this toCSV row inside of this println. So we're just chaining things. So we have the print writer, which prints a new line. And then in each line, we want the result of transforming each expense to a CSV row. So let's go ahead and rerun this. And go back to the expense report. Look at that. Look at how cool that actually looks. So we're not quite done yet. There's one more thing that we need to do. So these expenses are not ordered by month. But what we do know is that there is a class that we created called the expense sorter. And what we're going to do is we're going to call it right here. Okay. And we're going to instantiate it. And so now we can actually use it. And the expense sorter is the thing that's actually going to sort by month. So we sort by month. We sort the expenses by month. All right. We save those in a variable. So these are the, let's just call it sorted expenses. And then instead of looping through the expenses and then printing out each one, all we have to do is just to swap this out for the sorted expenses. And so now when we run this, this is actually going to reorder itself from January all the way to, I think the last one is November. So let's rerun this and then see what happens. Boom. Look at that. January to November, we have now created our first CSV file together. So this is something that you can actually change and adapt for your purposes at home. You can create a real expense tracker, or I don't know, a course tracker, or whatever the heck you want to do. But this is really cool, really neat. Super, super good job, guys. I'm so proud of you for making it this far in the course. So before we officially finish this course, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about. Number one is keep practicing. That's the only way that you're going to get better, is by pushing yourself, by trying out new things, by creating things on your own, by failing a lot, by learning a lot. And I highly encourage you to do it. Programming is such a fun hobby, and it can lead to such a fulfilling career. I would also say to look for other courses online. You would now be totally ready to learn how to develop an app for Android phones, for example. So look out for courses on YouTube or Udemy or what have you, and see if you can find a beginner's course to learn how to create, for example, an Android app, or you could look also for other general programming courses. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me via the YouTube comments, but you could also use my new business email. So my business email is anybodycanprogramchannel@gmail.com. So if you have any general questions, comments, or concerns, and you do not want to do that through the YouTube channel, then you could just direct those at this email address, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, it's been a super fun ride teaching this course, and I've had a great time creating all of these videos, and I hope that you've also enjoyed it. Don't forget that anybody can program, and I will see you in future videos.